Good to have you with us this morning. I'm Francesca Rudkin with you until midday. This is the Sunday session. So over his 5-decade career, Alfred Molina has played almost every character imaginable, from Dr. Otto Octavius in Spider-Man to Rivera Diego in Frida. Alfred is now starring in Prime Video's Three Pines. It's an adaptation of Louise Penny's murder mystery novels. Alfred plays Inspector Armand Gamache, and the show has been rated as one of the must-see programs to round out the year. I am delighted to be joined now by the brilliant Alfred Molina. Good morning. It is a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise.
I really hope you like this character of Armand, because the TV series is fantastic, and I believe there are about 20 books in the series. I have a feeling this character might hang around for a little bit.
Oh, from your mouth to God's ears. I'm sort of hoping it might be, this could be my pension job, No, it's a lovely character to play, and there is no doubt about it. The quality of the material really does, really is rooted in the novels. And I think Miss Penny has just published her 19th book. Or I think there's 20 altogether, because she also co-wrote one with Hillary Clinton. But I haven't got that far yet, and I'm not sure how much of that is connected with the Three Pines series of books. But certainly there is good 18, 19 books to do with Three Pines. So there's plenty of source material to get stuck into, for sure.
Armand is a little bit of a different detective, isn't it? It's quite a meaty role. Describe him a little bit to us.
Well, we've gotten used to, over the years, I think, a kind of male detective who is somehow tortured or haunted by, some terrible, terrible dark secret, or a habit, like he's a junkie, or he drinks, or terrible relationships with his children, or, with his wife or ex-wives. And I think we have a character who is the complete antithesis of that, in the sense that he's happily married. He gets on with his colleagues. He enjoys them. He revels in their success. He encourages them. He's very much a kind of mentor to his to his colleagues and his subordinates, and that creates a kind of, well, the best way I can put it. My 16-year-old granddaughter, when she asked me what I was up to, I started explaining to her this show, and I was waxing on a bit lyrical. I think I was waffling on a bit too much, and she just went, "Oh, Granddad, never mind all that. What's his superpower?" That was her question. This kind of need for a good soundbite, and I kind of went, that's interesting, and I couldn't answer her straight away. I kind of said something like, "Yeah, let me think about that," and then I did think about it, and I realized. His superpower, if anything, is empathy, a desire to understand why people behave a certain way. And I think the wonderful generosity of him as a character is that he understands that, given a certain set of circumstances, all of us are capable of something terrible. We're all capable of a terrible thing, even murder. And so the question isn't how and what and when. The question is really why. And I think this need to understand why is something that comes out of this inherent goodness in the character. Not that he's kind of, sanctimonious or po-faced about anything. I mean, he understands that there's evil in the world, and it's his job to uncover it. But I think he understands that, there's a point in one of the stories where someone talks about how they feel that somehow evil is limitless. And Gamache ends up saying, no, there is a limit to evil. The question is, we have to find it, which is why you have to delve into it. You have to find the limit. And I think that means that he comes to his work from a very, very different perspective, a much more, perhaps I should say, holistic way, But, and I think that's what makes him so interesting to play, because this notion of looking for the goodness in the world is actually a very playable thing. It's not just a conception. It's not just a kind of an idea. It's a very playable part of a character. And that's really, as actors, that's all we're looking for, is things that we can do, things that we can act, things that we can embody, if you know what I mean.
And I think a character with such thoughtfulness and compassion is something we're also looking towards in 2022. You know, it's something
Well,
that really appeals at the
I
moment.
hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think TV and as entertainment is a very, very broad church. And I think particularly the detective genre is a very broad church, and I think there's room for all kinds of denominations. There's room for LA Law and Order. There's room for Bosch. There's room for all these. There's all for Sherlock Holmes. For Agatha Christie. There's room for all of these, and I think what. And I think one reason why the genre is so popular and continues to be popular, I think, is that the best shows do something which they all have in common, which is that they bring the audience along. So the audience, in a sense, becomes part of the solving of the crime. The audience are involved in detecting the clues and so on. I mean, I remember watching old detective shows with my mum. And I remember her constantly saying things like, "Oh, he's the one. Nah, she did it."
I would like to say I'm 4 episodes in, and I haven't been able to pick the winner yet. I haven't been able to.
Oh, that's great. You see, that's what I'm delighted. I'm
Okay,
delighted to hear that. That's perfect.
keep working on it. I know that Louise has talked about being very protective over her work. It's very personal to her, but she backed your casting. That's a good beginning, isn't it? That was a good start.
Well, yes, it was a relief and an honor, really, because I know how difficult it must be. I mean, not that I'm a writer myself, but I can appreciate how difficult the process of handing over your work to be then adapted into a film or a TV series, because the process itself is reductive. Things get lost or cut, and I think I always remember being told by a writer that giving your books over to be adapted into something on the screen is a bit like giving away your children. And if you do give away your children, you don't really have a right in, you don't really have a say in how they're raised. So there's a kind of there's a kind of terrible sort of deal with the devil in a way for writers. And I know that after 20 odd years of writing this character, no one knows this character better than Louise Penny. So it's a real privilege to be able to say that one's got her blessing to play the part, certainly.
And I think I'm right in saying that the character was inspired by Louise's late husband. Did you learn much about him? He sounds like an incredible man.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really spoken in any detail to Louise about her late husband, Michael, but I have read in stuff that's been published and interviews that she's given that he was clearly a very, very, just a wonderful man. He was a doctor, a man who really gave himself to his profession, and his illness was tragic, and I think. He clearly was someone who, from what I can glean from things that Louisa said in public, that he was a huge, huge influence in her life and a wonderful, like a real rock. The relationship was very strong, very powerful, and I think when you lose something like that, it must be devastating. But it's also a credit to her that, in spite of that, she was able to turn a tragedy into something so fruitful and so giving and generous, thanks to that memory and the way she chose to honor her late husband. She's given the world, I mean, literally the world, she has a global audience for her book. She's given us all a tremendous gift.
Alfred, this is a murder mystery in the sense that there's always...
You mean our conversation?
No, it could be. There's always a murder, obviously, and it involves the eclectic townsfolk of Three Pines. But there's another story that that develops alongside this about the abuse of Indigenous children living in residential homes. And of course, this year we saw the Pope apologise to Canadian people, Indigenous people, for this. How important is this aspect of this show to you?
Well, it's hugely important because, as you say, we have the murder of the week. We're following the kind of, a traditional, format in that regard. But we do have this overarching storyline of Indigenous abuse, and in particular, how it applies to this one family that Armand Gamache decides to help. And it was very important because, you can't ignore the outside. You can't ignore the rest of the cult. When you're setting a show so specifically in a place, you can't really ignore everything else that's happening in that place. And because this tragedy of the history of what's happened to indigenous communities in Canada is still ongoing. This is not just a piece of their history. This is part of their lives now. But it was important to us not to come in as some kind of bunch of, white saviors to sort of, teach everyone how terrible this situation is. We wanted that conversation to be led by the community. So we've had, we relied very heavily on our Indigenous consultants, on our actors who are Indigenous. One of our directors, Tracy Deer, who is Mohawk, she was hugely influential and very important to us. She in fact helmed the 2 episodes that absolutely focus in on this story. And we wanted to learn, we wanted to understand, we wanted to find out, and we wanted that conversation to be led by them. And that was really the most important thing. Now, if the show itself becomes, part of or contributes in some small way to the conversation at large, then that's all for the good.
Alfred Molina is my guest this morning, and it's such a privilege to talk to you because I was actually just thinking about you a couple of weeks ago. We have an exhibition on here at our Auckland Art Gallery. It's a Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera exhibition. And I left that exhibition going, I'm going to go home and watch Frida again, of course, the film that you shot with Salma Hayek. And then then when I heard I was going to get an interview with you, I thought, gosh, I wonder what that is like. Is it awesome that these days with all the streaming services and on demand and the accessibility to anything and, anything, that we can access your work from years gone by?
Oh, yeah. I think it's one of the great, again, it's one of the great honors of being an actor that if you've worked in stuff that has a life, that has an afterlife, as it were, a shelf life, I think it's fantastic. I mean, it's the great sadness of theatre, for instance, is that theatre very often lives solely in the memory of those who have seen it. But recently, with theatre productions being available on live streamed and so on, that we've now got an ever-growing library of great plays, great productions, great performances that we can access, and that is a great thing. I mean, there's there are now channels on TV where you can watch theatre hits from 10, 15 years ago. It's a wonderful resource, and of course it's a great, the fact that people can still say, for instance, like, as mention movies that one's done like 10, 15, 20 years ago is wonderful, and I'm very proud of that film in particular. It was Salma, who was also a producer on the movie. She fought very, very hard for the cast that she wanted, myself and Jeffrey Rush and so on, against a lot of resistance from the money people, who wanted big names. They wanted A-listers, they wanted De Niro and, everybody. She resisted that. She said, no, this is my movie. This is how I want to make it. And that, to me, is that kind of loyalty was hugely, hugely important. And I'm constantly thanking her, both publicly and privately, for that. And it's wonderful that film is still around. And
yeah.
How was the exhibition? Was it wonderful?
Oh, it's good. Yes, it is wonderful. It is.
Oh,
yes.
fantastic.
Yes, very much enjoyed it. Look, just finally then, what do you put your success down to? I mean, you take a look back over dare I say it, but 4 decades, and it doesn't seem like you've had a lot of downtime over the years.
Well, I have had a bit of downtime, I must say. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's nearly 5 decades. It's 5 decades. I'm in my 5th decade now. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of what we've done. And I mean, I think career is something that you look back on. It's what's behind you. What's ahead is unknown, and that's the exciting part. It's like, people often say, "What are there any parts that you're looking forward to playing?" And I always think there's loads of them, but I don't necessarily know what they are. I'll know when they come, when I come across them. But I think, there was no secret, there was no plan to it. I basically said yes to everything that came along because my only criteria was to stay employed.
Well,
and
been incredibly successful at that.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for the series. It is absolutely binge-worthy. There's going to be a lot of people starting it and not stopping it. So, and I very much look forward to the next series and your retirement plan.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
Three Pines is on Prime Video now. It's worth a look. It's fabulous. 10:22.